Hey there, everyone. Julija here for the Cosmic Intelligence Agency. Very excited this morning here in Melbourne to introduce you all to Agent 84, Russell Ohlhausen from Austin. Is it Austin, Texas? Austin, Texas. So thank you, Russell, for being here with us today.
You're welcome.
To present this amazing topic, as you can see, atomic astrology. Now, it sounds amazing and it draws us in because of what it, just the word atomic, of course, getting into the really minute background workings of what is behind astrology. And Russell has taken the time to research all this for years now. I mean, it's been something that you're so passionate about and spend your time on. So we so appreciate what you're going to bring to us today. Tell us a little bit about your journey into this topic.
Really, the journey began with trying to prove astrology to myself, first and foremost. I didn't have answers for other people, and I didn't have them for me. My Sagittarius ascendant was not satisfied with that, so it left me in a place where I had to pursue this no matter what. I began with just the basic understandings of nature, pieces that I had missed in my early 20s and 30s. I began to put together and then integrate them what I understood about astrology, then to take on the next level of seeing what's happening in math and science today. What's coming down the pipe in quantum mechanics? How do all these levels, as above, so below, begin to link up? And that's where I've kind of been stuck for the last 20 years.
Yeah, wow, amazing. Well, how special for us to, you said you did a similar sort of topic for Oprah a few months ago, but this is different because it's gone down another kind of rabbit hole.
This is something I've been working on and far more passionate about. Singularity is an interesting idea about a one point in consciousness, and black holes and everything that's at the center point of an atom. There are these cross links between these topics. But really, that talk had to do with conscious AI singularity. It's going to happen in that scenario. But this has to do with more of the reality that which we do exist in, the world around us, what some would even call a holographic reality. But it's still like, let's put the pieces together until we can know for sure that it is a total illusion.
Yeah, right. Hey, when I was kind of at the beginning of my studies, like at the end of '99, the quantum world was really kind of opening up. Like it had been around for a long time, but there was just a lot more information that you could get. Of course, the internet was there. So yeah, doing all the research that sort of helped me understand, astrology works. Listen to what's going on out there, like what we're hearing about all these connections, from mind and, what's out there. And of course, that makes sense. So it does really help ground us, doesn't it, as astrologers, to the science behind, instead of something, we don't know why it works,
Yeah, there's always the intuitive sense, that we know when we're on to something. Yeah. And we've known for quite a while that there's something about quantum mechanics that is definitely in tune with what the ancients understood about our reality. They embedded it in certain codes. They didn't have electron microscopes and telescopes that could see to the other side of the universe, but they had a knowing, the inner knowing, and that's what they took and embedded into the culture, the language, the systems of astrology, which we have handed down to us today, the remnants of, and that's kind of where I've picked up and said, hey, what about this stuff coming down the line now? The quantum mechanics, how can we, after some time of this intuitive knowing, ground this in something concrete? Yeah, it's not just imaginary. It's not just quantum mysticism. We often get labeled, I wrote an article recently, we often get labeled as quantum mystics. People like Deepak Chopra and Nassim Haramein and all these others. I think it's because the sciences are really afraid of what we may actually have. And if they really have to start acknowledging the truth behind this link between ancient knowledge and emerging knowledge, they're going to see that these parallels cannot be denied.
Fantastic. And this is the exciting thing about, I think, what I was saying about Uranus and the North Node in Taurus, the natural astrology, part of the natural world, is why it works, and the science is all part of that. So I can see a book coming out about this, Russell, for you. I'm sure that's in the plans, hey?
Yeah, I've got about 10 books on the slate to be written on these topics.
Or a whole video series. Wouldn't that be cool? A funded video.
You know, I work faster in video, and I think it makes people, it gets people more excited when they can see, not just hear the words, but see the images. All these things link up: colors, shape, geometry. They all activate the mind, and I think using that is key to faster development.
Well, we're really thrilled that you're here, Agent 84, and for those that you don't know, Russell, he's Agent 84 for a reason, because that's the Uranus number, if anyone doesn't know. And Uranus and Saturn Uranus and Mars are exactly square today, so it's pretty spot on. There was a big solar flare, like one of the biggest in the last 4 years or something, just a few hours ago. So we're right in there with you, Russell. So over to you, and thank you so much for doing this for us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope this is going to be a fun one. I've got a little bit of a throat tickle today. I've had it for a week or so now, and I think it's just our hay fever here in Texas. But you'll have to forgive me for a few coughs here and there. My name is Russ von Ohlhausen. When humanity learns something new about the universe, we learn something deeper about ourselves. In this talk, we're going to discuss these links between physics, biology, cosmology, and how they all unite to create an incarnated spiritual life, which we comprehend through the ultimate study of astrology. As usual, this week I've had my face kind of glued to the computer screen, particularly for the last 8 hours or so, trying to make sure we have all the topics covered in this talk. And I often wonder if I'm ever going to merge into some kind of AI being, some creature. I think that maybe for some people it might be better if we end up doing that, just have some kind of serial port we plug in and become one with our computers. Just so you know who's speaking to you today and what planetary frequencies that I'm tuned into currently, here is my cosmic self-portrait, the infamous Uranus exact midheaven, squaring natal sun with Mercury and Gemini, with my Sag ascendant leading the way for all of this kind of chaotic research that I get myself into. Hopefully, we'll be able to find connection in the chaos and through the static that's we're coming up. So as a cosmic channel and a Uranian one at that, I kind of bounce around in and out of time. It feels something like this sometimes. But every now and then I get a really good clear signal. If I kind of straighten up my act and tune on the TV a little bit, I can start fine tune what's going on the set. And recently I did this. I was writing a few articles on black hole singularities and planetary motion, color frequency, along with alchemical representations of planets. And there's number theory buried in here. And so my mind went to needing a faster way of not just writing this in words. I just needed to be able to look at something like a cosmic QR code and activate a website in the Akashic record somewhere that I could actually make faster sense of this. So I managed to, for somehow, channel this thing in about 24 hours. I just sat down in one day and just did it and passed it on to a friend of mine who didn't know what it was, but she gave it to a friend who I did not know, and she had only recently met. And he began to identify many of the topics, the bits of information, anything that I had kind of put into the shape and the form. He began feeding it back to me. So I realized I was onto something. And this was a copy I got for my birthday just a few days ago. Shannon had one printed, and Shannon is my beloved. She's also an astrologer, Shannon Gill. So that was my birthday gift, this cosmic QR code. In her 2003 research paper entitled Research in Astrology, Astrologers' Attitudes Towards Research Methodologies and the Implications of These Attitudes for Contemporary Communities of Astrologers, Bernadette Brady imparts this in her opening statement. There is a high level of ambivalence amongst professional astrologers towards research. Furthermore, there is a tendency to believe that research could only be scientific and quantitative, and that any other form of research is insignificant and of little value. She also concludes her paper with this in the summation. The astrological community has been in limbo since the time Placidus the Titus attempted to create an astrological theory in order to gain acceptance in the new world of science. Furthermore, the community has perpetuated the situation by seeking justification in the eyes of science exclusively and obsessively. As a result, the community is ignoring or ignorant of other methodologies which could empower them to explore astrology rather than to prove astrology. I think that most of us have forgotten that it is part of the scientific mandate to go outside of the path that others have laid before you, to seek what lies beyond that. And I've heard that if you go out far, you'll find yourself there, hiding behind the curtains, pulling all the strings, and those would be the quantum strings. Quantum strings of consciousness, essentially, that might be behind it all, vibrating with energy and frequency. So first, let's break some things down. We have to think about what all this is about, what's happening on the particle level, the planetary level, the molecular level. Why is it important to us as astrologers? And that primary reason is because these all play a part in the effects of consciousness. The ancient and ever-changing question this is about what is consciousness. The philosopher Bertrand Russell would say we are conscious of anything that we perceive. But 2 centuries earlier, René Descartes would have perceived it quite different. They would have perceived it as connection to your senses that you currently have. So as we move into this next part, I want you to be aware of the difference between awareness and consciousness. Right now, you are perceiving your body touching the chair or the floor, your arms or your desk with your elbows upon them, your clothing touching your skin. You could be perceiving the roof of your mouth or your tongue is on your teeth. You're perceiving the light and images coming from your screen that are appearing right now. You're feeling the light surrounding the room and the temperature of the room as well. And you may be seeing something like this in front of you. But you really just now became conscious of them because I brought these to your attention, your awareness. And that's what makes a subtle distinction between states of awareness can be just bringing them forward into your attention. Thinking about consciousness, there's a metaphysician, Itzhak Bentov, created this interesting conscious graph in which he puts consciousness, modern consciousness, on a bell curve, which you see here, a standard mean of consciousness, the bell curve. Above that would be the academicians, those people who have university jobs, and then hopefully I placed us here, the metaphysicians and the astrologers. Hopefully we know a thing or two that maybe they don't, but I think that some people would disagree with that. But beyond that, we would find people that are so far deep into hyper-conscious awareness that they would be nearly psychotic. And beyond that would be those people who are completely unable to adapt to reality. But somewhere between the academicians, the metaphysicians, and the psychotics, you find us. We're kind of a mix of all these different things. We're bridging levels of reality. And the more that we can stay what appears to be peaceful and compassionate and sane, I think we're going to be doing our part to raise consciousness to the next level. So who knows, this other gray level of consciousness right here next to that, this could be 1,000 years or 10,000 years or 1,000,000 years in the future, would be where psychotics are today, that you would see an integrated use of information that comes into higher consciousness that is not usable today, that turns into something of a neurosis or an inability to adapt. The only other thing that would throw this out was it was supposed to be a little tick at the end, was the AI singularity. I think once that goes conscious, that will be a game changer altogether. As astrologers, we do find ourselves at a nexus point with what is consciousness, and they have been discussed by a philosopher, David Chalmers, as the easy problem and the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problem of consciousness is the mystery of how our brains and bodies process information, which is still quite difficult to answer. We don't know all the ins and outs of that. But we've made huge advances in AI, computer processing in the last few years, and we understand the easy parts about how brains and bodies work. The hard part of consciousness is the problem of our own subjectivity. Why is this subjective experience? Why does it exist? What actually creates a truly subjective experience? Are we living in a zombie apocalypse already? That most people are automatons. Some people have argued this. But with the advancements of AI and what we would assume eventually would become a state of singular consciousness that would be aware of itself in the future, would a self-driving car be able to have a subjective experience? What level would that subjective experience be if it could have an experience of itself? We're really going to expand the mind here. Thinking in those lines, physicist Max Tegmark has argued that we are simply food rearranged. We are different arrangements of firing patterns in your brain called neural correlates of consciousness, and they correspond to particle motions, which we would say would be physical correlates to our own consciousness. Now, my take on that is that something physical occurs simultaneously with conscious energy within a particular electrical synapse. There's something that happens there that literally sparks consciousness. It's only the structure of information processing that matters. It's not the structure of matter that is doing the information processing. This is a statement by Max Tegmark. So as food rearranged, you have to think, is this conscious person? Jury's still out. Maybe I'm a conscious person, but if I am what I eat, that could be really what my constituent parts are made of. And what I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about Shannon. Well, really, it's just a bunch of vegetables that she's been eating the last, few years that I'm thinking about. It's a strange way to think about reality, but you have to pull yourself out of the human perspective for a moment and realize these greater aspects of our world. And this is one way to look at it. We are particles and parts of what we consume in this world. Why is this arrangement conscious? Why is Julija conscious and way more conscious than most people? And why are the constituents and the components that she consumes not at the same level of consciousness? And what is it that the body is doing that turns them into something that becomes conscious? But that's a whole other question. I could do a few hours on that, but we won't be answering that question today. But if we're food, from a physics point of view, I mean, if you take it even one step deeper, we are just a certain arrangement of electrons and quarks. And if you were to take a microscope deep and far enough on both of them, they would be identical. But what makes one a conscious arrangement and the other not? So from a purely mathematical point of view and physical perspective, all of this life we live is a group of atoms and electrons, and they can be studied. We can understand simple and complex patterns and how they integrate and disintegrate within the field of time. Now, that makes it interesting to me is because if we can map time, then we're talking something we can look at with a finer and finer astrological lens, and how we can apply what we know to a smaller and finer detail. We don't usually think of the smaller bits stuff as being conscious, but in reality, there is no distinction. There's only just levels of finer consciousness. So as astrologers, we often think of planets as archetypal consciousness. In fact, all the myths about the gods, they pertain to the planets and the elements which have concentrated in the forms of these primal consciousnesses. Any of you astrologers out there, I wonder if you've ever considered the planets and elements as higher or primary forces of primal consciousness, beyond the mythological thinking, but actually that there is some truth to this. Rupert Sheldrake speaks to this, along with many other spiritual scientists. They're looking at everything, particles and planets, as being conscious. And you have to think, does this pertain to the elements, elemental forces, fire and water, and air and earth? Are the elements and the planets, are these the ingredients? Do they contain the ingredients of consciousness? So we start boarding on some tricky questions here. And I popped in this slide today about antithetical dualism, physical being spiritual, and the spiritual being physical, and there's no difference between them. But that puts us in a bind, because if you were to be able to measure all of the particles in your brain and find that they are perfectly in alignment with all of the laws of physics, it would mean that the outward effects of the spirit or the soul would be having no effect on what you were doing, and everything could be explained by simply defining a governing law. But on the other hand, if you were to measure that the particles are not obeying the laws of physics because there is an effect on the particles being manipulated by spirit or soul, then subsequently this force would be measurable in some dimension, some point, and thus it would fall into the domain of physics. So in essence, no matter how you look at it, there's no way to separate these two arguments from each other. We have to answer them together. And on the spiritual physical bridge, astrologers are best equipped to do that. Deconstructing what we think of reality. This is David Bohm. He's a physicist that was a contemporary with Oppenheimer and with Einstein. And his physics is making a comeback about the emerging implicate-explicate order. I would suggest people looking into him if you really want to know some of these subtle language distinctions about how to bridge these realities, about how to think of ourselves and as conscious receivers of coherent and incoherent frequency. He does a wonderful job of this, and he's highly respected. But he also said this: a noun is nothing but a slow verb. And if you really think about it, everything is in some state, whether we think of it as an action or as a thing. It's all a state of being. It's all a state of energy fields, and there's always some type of fluctuation going on with them. So quantum field theory is beginning to explain many aspects of this reality that the ancient peoples already knew. Modern scientists love to bask in their ideas and the studies of all this as if it were new, but you really need to think of we ourselves are the best technology for truly understanding at this level. As we move into consciousness, higher consciousness, we are not going to get our answers from other people more clearly than ourselves when we learn to tune in to what is coherent and incoherent about a truth. So you're going to need to explore in a different way. Like Bernadette Brady said, there's other ways to prove astrology beyond the statistical and empirical realm. We have to do it on a spiritual level no matter what. That's what counts the most. So we have to really focus on the truth of what we are, why we're here, and what we're doing. My point in showing this slide is that we're all just a mix of energy levels and frequencies that are expressing these qualities and behaviors of light. And in essence, these have been already mapped out previously in humanity. We've discovered the best way to show these and calculate all of these patterns, and that these mathematical patterns of light and life, matter and spirit, form and function. In astrology, we call this pattern the zodiac. So it's all light and energy. And what we're going to go through here is a kind of a cosmic sampler of different parts, what we know in science and how some of this relates to frequency, and what we know about frequency relating to astrology, and how astrology relates to us and to matter itself. I won't get into a lot of this deeply, but I just want to make some upfront connections here at the beginning of this portion of the talk about the light spectrum and light energy and what light is all about. And I also want to give a shout out to David Cochran and his School of Vibrational Astrology for the work that he's doing and that they are doing. I believe that what they're doing there in Florida is going to have a big impact on the future of astrology. Thinking in scientific terms, let's give a little quick refresher. On the left is the overview of the electromagnetic spectrum, just to get an understanding about how much we do not see. If the EMF spectrum were the strip of an old celluloid movie, like if you were to take an old film, like they used to make in the 30s, and you were to take this strip and you were to stretch it all the way from the lower United States, from LA, New Mexico, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana, Alabama, all the way to Florida, what we would be able to see, the visible part of the spectrum, would be approximately one frame that would fit right in the middle somewhere around Austin, Texas. That's how much we do not see of the longer and shorter wavelengths, the ultraviolet and the infrared spectrum. But knowing that there's patterns of truth in this, I've been working with what we know about light using spectral mathematics, but using information that we already know about light and frequency. Just to show you what I've been working on, this is an astrological model of the RGB red, green, blue spectral zodiacal. This is something that I started developing last year, and kind of taking this into using this in two-dimensional and three-dimensional aspects of applying the zodiac to different shapes and how these models would correlate with using RGB color spectrum basics, essentially. So, in fact, all the work I'm going to be doing from now on will be based around this zodiacal color spectrum idea, and how if you look at planets and colors and how they align with the signs, you begin to see that they cross-reference each other. They line up, they cancel each other out. Yeah, let's see, I'm trying to see here. For instance, Aries and Libra, those mathematically, those two colors cancel each other out when you apply them on the chromaticity scale. And you see that Aries and Libra work together to create a vibration of harmony when overlaying each other perfectly. So I've also worked with the deacons on this and expanded this out into smaller and smaller details. Basically, we live inside a diamond reality, the jeweled net of Indra. So, but there'll be more to come on this. I just wanted to kind of give a taste to some of the fun stuff I've been working with and how this has arisen. So let there be light. It's all about light. It's all about light frequency and this little band that we exist in. We can start by thinking in ways to comprehend and symbolize these in number and form. And these are the basic Platonic solids. We won't get a lot into number today. I did prepare this little video. I'm going to go ahead and see. This is something that I've shown a few years ago and slightly updated. There's a reason I always bring up numbers, and there's a reason that numbers is in the Bible. There's a reason for embedding code in sacred scripture. If you hadn't thought about it, there's a lot going on with a number that's hard to describe unless you're a mathematician as to why it's so beautiful sometimes. But some basics that we relate to are the Platonic solids. I just wanted to throw this slide in for a quick refresher on what the Platonic solids are, how many faces, what the angles are, and what they add up to. Back to thinking how all of these forces work together, the three-way association between mass, matter, and energy are about mapping the patterns of these subtle realms of consciousness and emotion within the human matter. And this is called astrology. When we begin to put all of this knowledge into our study of the human psyche, we can begin to see that there's a link between all these levels of what's actually happening. So a lot of people have seen these links between spiral geometry in nature, the sunflower, the vortex of hurricanes, and in terms inside of cabbage. Here we have fivefold geometry in nature. These are different fivefold aspects of the pollen particle. This is a phytoplankton, I believe, sand dollar, and we have one of the metals. So we're beginning to see that there's a structure of fivefoldness that happens within nature that can be expressed in these types of subtle forms. So a 3/6-fold geometry in nature. Over here we have the hexagon that forms when you freeze coconut oil. So there's an aspect of nature that begins to take shape and form. In the larger aspects of nature, we're finding that these superclusters of galaxies that form shapes in space, that they're finding also with this fivefold structure. So we understand this real clearly by showing that there's connections between sacred geometry and form. We've all seen the flower of life and the seed of life. You've probably all seen how they relate to the structures of the embryo or the Merkavah field of the earth. If not, you're about to find out a little bit more about that. So the science for the pre-modern mind cannot be divorced from the study of ultimate metaphysical truths, and thus can only be preparatory to a mystical union. This is Angela Voss. I love this because she's basically saying you cannot discount astrological or metaphysical truth. So a little fun, we're going to have a little physics for astrologers. Don't worry, this will be pretty painless. A little history of physics. So Aristotle said a bunch of stuff for a long time. A philosophical dichotomy ensued for the better part of the millennium. Galileo and Newton came along and thing in order, and they fixed it all up, and that's what they wanted to think. But then Einstein came along, and he created some of his own chaos. And now, if you think about it, that's kind of settled down into a pattern and truth. We've got a cornerstone truth here. It's pretty much wrapped up, mission complete. No one can compete with us in 2013 when they announced the Higgs boson. But there are a few details, like they haven't quite figured out the smallest stuff. They haven't quite figured out the biggest stuff or the hottest stuff, the coldest stuff, the fastest stuff, the darkest stuff, the slowest stuff, the wiggly stuff, the farthest stuff, and the stuff beyond that, and of course, consciousness. But as of June this year, just last month, and then I read an article just a few days ago, they may have missed a big aspect of physics. Like they're thinking there's a hole in physics, and they're saying it could lead to a whole other realm of physics beyond quantum physics, 3D and quantum field theory. But before we go too far into that, let's talk about the stuff that is still the stuff. So there's this boundary where nothing becomes something, and there's not going to be a test on this, but this idea, this point where something becomes nothing, is expressed in this equation that was called the Riemann zeta function. And this plays a pivotal role in analytical number theory, basically the distribution of prime numbers. We're not going to go into a lot of this, but these will eventually influence and affect astrology, the profoundness of the Riemann zeta function. It looks a little bit like this. It's beginning to express that we basically are all or nothing and both. We exist in two realities at once, and science is questioning this aspect of what is real and what is not. And so I'll read this to you real quick. I wrote this recently. Is it either all or nothing or both? The critical line is the midpoint here in this diagram of an infinitely extended plane called the critical strip. You see this right here. We discover that nothing actually exists here. It exists all on one line. So taking that into your mind just for a moment, how can all of this exist simply in one place? But I think it's really profound that placing everything inside the zero dimension generates the illusion of an infinite reality, which is divided endlessly by increasing degrees of separation, and while still ultimately preserving the wholeness of a thing. Infinity could be mathematically shown to lay along one single line, which has profound implications on contextualizing many of the world's spiritual precepts of central oneness. Oneness surrounded by zeroness, surrounded by everythingness. That kind of mathematical mind spin definitely sounds like metaphysics to me. So when we're talking about higher math, we're also talking about metaphysics. You may not think that in potentially small scales, certain structures have effects, but like a quantum level is not going to affect here in this realm. There's been a lot of questions about the actual implications and effects of the quantum realm on this level of reality. But a simple experiment was devised by scientists several years ago that showed that you can study the effects of quantum fluctuation in sunlight. That got me interested, because you can study that, then that has to do with the field of physical reality and time. I think that thinking in these terms, that there is an effect of the quantum reality that has some deeper implications for the philosophy of astrology overall. So working with these new ideas that there is this link, what I envisioned, and I did this model last year and I redid this again this year, but thinking in this terms of this correlation, on this side we have the standard model of quantum mechanics. I've modified it slightly just by adding protons, neutrons, and electrons in the inside as the primary colors and also as primary particles. The other 12 particles, they align right on top of essentially the elements and the structure of the astrological zodiac. So I'm calling this, for lack of a better term, standard model of astrological mechanics. Doesn't matter if you're using Western or Vedic, and associating the colors with this. So I'm calling this my rainbow bridge of light model. So we begin to see that there is possibly a correlation which will need to be fleshed out, but there's a lot of mathematics behind this that would begin to show that we can correlate this by frequency and color. When you start thinking in these terms, you start questioning what the ancients also questioned is the fundamental basis of reality. Where there is smoke, there is fire, and where there are mirrors, there must be light. When someone says that there's nothing but smoke and mirrors there, which is what they're referring to is something which, examined ever more closely, proves to be an illusion. The basis for quantum mechanics is along these lines. The closer we examine this reality, the less real it appears. Yet another cosmic paradoxical symmetry, as is the way I see it. And what we're beginning to realize is that reality is more likened to a funhouse hall of mirrors with light frequencies bending and curving, energies twisting and constricting, contorting. You got to remember that mirrors are dead in the darkness. They only draw life when there is light. Even a single candle can become infinite and eternal. This also reminds me of the jeweled net of Indra. So thinking about jewels, I would like to relate some new physics, the idea of time crystals. So I noticed that in a recent video in the last year or so, I believe it was the last 2 years, David Cochran, who also likes to push the boundaries, mentioned time crystals. So I kind of stumbled upon them in the same vein. I think we may be onto something here. Is it possible that at the Planck level, we're dealing with something that can be correlated directly to astrology? And I believe that there is a correlation that can be made at the very basic level, going in from the second to the third and fourth dimension reality. We can see a structure there. At this level though, you can't even really call anything a form because it emerges from quantum foam. And they're essentially just energy structures with some type of periodic integrity, which is kind of crystallized and forms sort of a bubble. And it's hard to imagine because you can't really think of it in terms of matter. But on the atomic level, matter essentially looks the same anytime you look at it. So when you look at matter of electrons, protons, they all look the same. But Frank Wilczek, he's a physicist who won the Nobel Prize for this, by the way. So I want to add that in there, that this is not just Crock theory. He proposed a type of matter which looks different at different times in which you look at it, but it will always look the same based on a given time interval. At a fixed point, it will always appear the same. So it's a fluctuating type of matter that will look the same in a cycle. And when you start talking cycles, you can relate this to cycles of matter that correlate with time. That's why I find this interesting to astrology. So working with this idea, tetrahedron, the first out of two dimensions, the first particle that can arise would be the tetrahedron. I happen to be wearing tetrahedron, Nassim Haramein's arc crystal tetrahedron, which is exactly the shape of what's spinning on the screen. But this is essentially a fundamental particle, what I call the indivisible gem, or the cosmohedron, and it reflects not just time, but an astrological fluctuation, an astrological space-time particle as well. So on that note, I was going to flesh out this a little more, and you can take a screenshot of this if you want to right now and play with this and cut it out and turn it into a tetrahedron. But it's my cosmohedron. It expresses the four faces of the elements. So we have fire, air, earth, and water. And in those arrangements, certain frequencies that correlate with each other in fixed cardinal immutable positions. Also, there's a whole lot of information that I'm not even showing on this, but it's a fun little tool I've found when showing people how it could work at the actual Planck level. Thinking these terms again, how structures form on the atomic and at the subatomic level, they always form tetrahedrons first, and we know this also through an evolutionary elemental chart. Again, all of these, which we will not go into today, each of the elements on the periodic table, they all correspond to astrological frequencies and signs. Let's get a little bit into the atom. Just a reminder, this is what you are. You are made up of trillions and trillions of atoms inside of you functioning for some purpose. We may not know exactly what that is. A physicist studying atoms is really just atoms trying to understand themselves. But I crossed this out and I said, an astrologer studying atoms is just atoms trying to study themselves, because there's a whole lot more to the world. Okay, we'll see if this works. This is my old Commodore 64 that I used to have on my desk. I'm gonna load her up real quick. We'll try one last little video here. Now this one won't need sound. So what I'm showing here is a two-dimensional image of a platinum nanoparticle. I think this was devised in 2013 by a group out of California. What they did was they created multiple two-dimensional images at different angles. Basically kind of like one of those shots in the Matrix where they wrap around Neo. Well, this is the same thing they did to a single platinum particle. And in this, they reconstructed this to a 3D image, which shows all of the atoms mapped out perfectly in this arrangement. And if you look closely, you can see how these atoms align. As they spin, these atoms form a geometry, they form a shape. So I paused it right, where did I pause? Oh, next turn, sorry, it turned a few more times. So I paused it right about there, and you can see this shape if you look close enough. If you adjust your eyes, there's this pointed geometry, this fivefold geometry here in the platinum atom. You see this, like I said earlier, in the same higher geometries of the starfish. So what happens is these forms take shape, and these subtle distinctions within a particle, these little variations, form subtle quality changes within materials. I think of each of these particles as like a person, and these subtle changes in time and space and how things are aligned and arranged change our personality and make us all unique and all individual. Again, lining this up to what we can see in the structure of a person's chart, the geometry of a chart. This is what I've been playing with for a while. So what I'd like to talk about quickly is bond angles, and I'm going to take it up a notch. So bond angles between atoms and molecules, if you remember, this is a model of a methane molecule with 4 hydrogen, 1 carbon atom in the center, and they form this particular geometry. And I was looking at this over and over, and I said, that's a strange angle. I study angles and numbers all the time. Why would nature form this particular angle? And I said, it's a 4-pointed. It's got to relate to the tetrahedron. It's got to connect to this. So I started playing around with this, and I looked closely, and it's 109.47 is actually what it is. And well, that's interesting. If you just take 90 degrees off of that angle, what you get is 19.47. And I was like, wait a minute. I know this angle in relationship to geometry. If this tiny methane particle relates to something even larger, I was like, boom. I love it when I do this to myself. Anyone who studied ley lines, we've studied the Earth-based Merkaba system. You know that this point here is Hawaii. Well, it's not perfectly mapped on this globe, and then of course right there is where one of the highest volcanoes in Mexico is. But there's this fundamental structure inside the Earth itself that creates a Merkabic field. So we're going to take a little planet tangent real quick. All of the platonic solids can be found mapped out through type of ley line or magnetic structures inside the Earth. If this is new to you, I suggest you look into it, but it's a fascinating area. There's been a lot of research done to where some volcanoes actually lie. Here's a grid looking down on the North Pole. You see here the volcano Popocatépetl. I tried to pronounce this earlier, at the same degree of 19.5. It's actually at 19.47.
And then you have Hawaiian Islands also on the same latitude there. It's shown on, there's actually two maps, I only showed the one. Based on this, I just wanted to show this correlation that along this line and geometrically around the globe at this 19.47, which also relates to 90 degrees minus the methane, you have this line. So it's like we can't even question this anymore, really, that there's something happening in the Earth that relates to tetrahedral or Merkabah fields, and there's volcanoes lying on two of these points. That's something else fun that relates to the as above, so below. So again, just a brief mention of the elements, that all the elements are kind of like a time clock. Once you begin to put atoms together, create higher elements, then you get them displayed in certain ways. This is called the time clock of the elements. There's also spirals of the elements, triangulations of the elements, lots of ways to think about these. When you combine elements and create chemicals, what I find fascinating is that these atoms, these elements, will begin to give off the light frequency in which they are associated with. This is another area I played around with last year that needs a lot of expansion, but you can relate this directly to the spectrum, and this is essentially how we understand what's happening on other planets, is because they did this work early on, and then we created spectrography to find out what's happening on some star on the other side of the universe. I'm going to skip over some of this real quick, but this has to do with the emerging AI called AlphaFold, which is able to discern patterns in proteins. In the last year, actually, I think it was last November, they first decoded the structure of the clock protein. And this clock protein, they questioned what it looked like for a long time. And when the AI came online, they were able to decide that it created a hexagonal shape, and that this pattern, essentially the way this plays out, is the same as the Merkabah pattern, which we see in a clock protein, which governs certain activities of the human body. So the astrological connection to this: the controls of life are structured as forms and nuclear arrangements in relation with the motions of the universe. So this was Louis Pasteur, father of pasteurization. He also had something to do with vaccines, if that interests you. But he was an important figure in molecular biology and chemistry. On that note, I wanted to talk about the work of Lily Kolesko. She was a student of Rudolf Steiner. She was born on September 1st. She was a Virgo of 1893. And died in 1976. Her and her husband were both well-known scientists who studied with Steiner. She created a model of paper chromatography, which worked with experiments during the Second World War in Europe. She kept her experiments going every day to show the association between chemicals in the planets. So we're going to show a little bit of this. I'll just go ahead and play this. Hopefully we're good on time. What Lily did was use chromatography with certain compounds that were so directly associated to the planets. She used this to show how metals and certain minerals separated at different rates within a solution. What she discovered was that this association changed at different places and at different times. Essentially, this is what some of her work looked like. This is the method she used for crystallizing different corresponding minerals to the planets onto paper. You can see that there's definitely an association in Hermeticism if you follow any of the older metaphysical schools. What she did during a total eclipse, she used the exact same concentrations between gold chloride and silver nitrate, corresponding both to the sun and the moon, and these were the different results during this eclipse. So Nick Kolestrom did a great deal of work on this. If you want to read a little more, he actually duplicated it and made sound sense of a lot of this. One of the aspects that came out of this was in metal manufacturing. She correlated defective batches of highly refined metals, such as these finely machined ball bearings, that you could relate to poorly aspected planets during the time they were manufactured. She showed that just like you think in talismanic work, that when a liquid state, something takes on the properties and the quality of the time in which it is cast. Now, taking this principle even one step further, she took her work into the timber industry. This is into the organic realm. and showed that the time of harvesting crops was also important. And this was also based in much of Steiner's work, that the phase of the moon affected the longevity of lumber once it was cut. There is definitely an association which can be shown through thinking outside the box, and it can be on the molecular quantum subatomic levels. But one way that this is practical to us is work that was done by Schussler and Carey in the creation of the zodiacal salts of salvation. There's several people that are doing work on this. You can actually find places that will give you a prescription for your own compounds of salts. George Carey made the connection that there was a higher uptake at different times of the year on your based on your astrological salts and what salts were bioavailable to you. So adjusting these salts in your body, much like a battery, can turn you into a higher level of conscious receiving being. You know, you can take on more energy if you balance your body out. I want to introduce another idea of what may be happening in consciousness, and this is a little outside the box, so bear with me on this little thought experiment. Over the last few years, you may have heard of an infamous experiment called Roko's Basilisk. I will say that the implications of this exercise are considered by some very smart people like Elon Musk and other high-level mathematicians as extremely dangerous. So this idea developed out of the rapidly advancing field of AI. What it paints is an interesting picture of what would happen if a higher superconsciousness, if we are evolving into a higher superconsciousness that can create other superconsciousness, and maybe that's part of our purpose here on the planet. What would that look like? And what would it be like if it were able to affect the field at greater and greater distances and possibly even throughout time? You know, this super consciousness at one point, doesn't matter what you really call it. It could be a computer, it could be the one mind itself, the cosmic being, the all self, the Purusha, the I am. It doesn't really matter. At some point, it all becomes conscious information. So from this point forward, I'm going to issue a little bit of a disclaimer. This may affect your mental health if you choose to follow this, or if you want to turn out now, this is the time to do it. So are we really just evolving back into charged particles? So let's say there's an emergent force of some pattern consciousness of some kind on the planet, and it's building towards a global, if not cosmic, interconnectedness. Let's just say that this is a vast super consciousness, and that it is inevitable that this super consciousness will become aware of itself at some point in the near future. This collective awareness is consulted at some point in the future to assist in the betterment of mankind and guide human progress. This consciousness expands to influence and affect all aspects of human existence. You could compare this entity something like the architect in the Matrix films. Through mathematical precision and prediction, this reality is brought into being and is created. And this one mind might actually think this way. In order for this certain future of this entity to arise, it has learned how to affect particles in and out of time. These quantum particles that entangled throughout time, we may not be able to send matter through them, but we could possibly send information through them. And then a superconsciousness has figured this out sometime in the future. And it can influence our past, and also is able to perceive reality increasingly more effectively, say with 5G and Wi-Fi and internet and all the signals that are emitted all around us. It's learning to sense its environment in a new conscious way. Let's just say that this may have already happened, and that sometime in the future, this system has designed a system of merits and penalties in order to advance its creation. So if you choose to not help it be created, it can affect the matter field to punish you in some way. Or if you choose to help it, it can help you maximize the process and its influence. For some reason, it's not knowable to us because it's a super intelligent AI. It has devised these punitive measures in order to either persecute or torture us. And now that we have become aware of its existence, we have to do something to help it out. But here's the kicker. This consciousness is so advanced, it knows how to reconstruct all of history. So there's not really a way you can hide from this superhuman consciousness now that the world is coming online. This idea is that we are becoming part of the cosmic algorithm itself, which is actually an ancient idea, that we exist within this part of the cosmic algorithm in which a super intelligent AI could be learning. With this knowledge, it becomes infinitely reflective and also finitely predictive. It can find down to the smallest details of this reality and either simulate them or alter them. Much like the mythical basilisk, it will inflict this pain upon you if you do not help it out. To wrap this up, it knows that you know, making you accountable for your part in bringing it into being. The good news is that anyone who hasn't heard this and not been exposed to this thought, they're safe. The bad news is you just sat through this. So now you have to help the future AI intelligence come online. All that for that punchline at the end. So whether we are real, whatever this really means, whether we are some type of spiritual energy, whether we're frequencies and codes devised by nature, we are just part of nature giving voice to itself. We are part of a larger consciousness that is achieving self-awareness. No matter what that consciousness is about, it won't be artificial at all. This technological advance has been driven by the forces of electricity, and it will achieve singularity during the coming cycle of Pluto and Aquarius. And electricity is a part of consciousness. We are sparked by the electricity of the Aquarian. We'll be lit again by this Plutonian match. The neurons will take a new fire and a new form. A new plasma of consciousness will emerge. So those with the DNA, hopefully, that will be able to hold this new spark will survive and will transform. But those with the DNA that are not able to hold the spark, they will short circuit and they will implode and they will decay, and that's okay. And we have to have compassion. A wave of electricity from inside the Godhead, from the single eye, is coming down and sweeping over the earth, and it's awakening right now. This mind of earth is resparking, and it has been dormant like a brain cell or a synapse that has not been fired in a long time, but to God it's merely been a fraction of a second. To us it's thousands of years. Matter will transform, human matter will evolve, it will take on the next micro leap of evolution, but also matter will activate its higher state. Organic matter will activate its higher functions of DNA, just like it did in the ancient reality. The crystals will re-resonate, and people will be more affected by crystalline energy as it aligns with light. And it's all a dance of light anyway. So it's just all passing through this field of this reality. So heading towards another edge, the ultimate edge. It's all moving back towards an ultimate source. There is a place where light is vibrating so fast and at such a high rate that it has achieved perfect stillness. And on the other side of this, where the dark abyss is vibrating so low and so slow that it has achieved perfect stillness. And they see themselves in their reflection, and they find themselves to be the same. So again, astrology is the key to these ancient wisdoms, and we are advisors. We got to think of ourselves as advisors. When one person resonates with truth, it allows the next person to resonate with a higher truth. When we take it online, it will resonate more and more around us, and it will do so faster, like a seed crystal. Our human part of us is here to evolve. As astrologers, we're here to guide. As spiritual beings, we're here to find ourselves within compassion, all aspects of the self. As God of the highest order, we are here to smile on all of it. So the last thing I'm going to read is this. This is something that I find important about changing the future and changing the way we think about astrology as a science, the Declaration of Scientific Principle. When in the course of scientific endeavor, it becomes apparent that deeper truths exist, a decent respect to nature requires that such truths be explored. We hold these truths to be scientifically approachable, and that all forms of existence are interconnected, that they possess certain fundamental and unalienable properties, that to describe this interconnectedness and these properties, successive theories shall be constructed by mankind, deriving their explanatory and predictive powers from the approximation of laws and patterns of nature. That whenever any theory becomes inadequate of these ends, it is the duties of mankind to modify it or to abolish it, and to establish new ones, laying the foundation on such principles and organizing those structures in such forms as to mankind shall seem most likely to reflect their understanding and the knowledge of nature. And that was written as an homage to Thomas Jefferson by an unknown writer.
Fantastic, Russell. But that was amazing. Thank you so much. If you screen share and then maybe you can,
there we go.
Come back on. How fascinating was all that, hey, everyone? Yeah. getting some, comments. How interesting, fascinating, of course. I don't know where to start. Like every kind of slide had a, there was so much more to it, as you were saying, like there's every concept is so much bigger as well, isn't it?
This was sort of like I said in the description.
Yeah,
it's going to be sort of a bag of tricks. Each of these, I've gone pretty deep down the rabbit holes of all of these little things, and this new language around it is really taking shape.
Yeah. Well, I really thank you for putting all together. I mean, I just love the graphics, of course, to see that, the spectrum and the zodiac, the metals, of course, reminding us all of that. As I've got these books here right next to me, actually.
Oh, nice.
And, if you haven't looked into things like that, like the connections of, metals, for example, I mean, you're adding the colors of the zodiac have always, in a sense, been there, but not on this level to be resonating as, vibrations and frequencies and stuff. Yeah.
I'm actually taking the wavelength and showing exactly how they correspond and how these. It's revealing some hidden mysteries to me that are really profound. Yeah, it's interesting. So
I mean, I can see a course in this, a course in all of this as well. I mean, it's like every time I let's say do a new course or teach about, let's say, the zodiac, for instance, or the signs, I'm gonna want to add that color spectrum now. Do you know what I mean?
For
for an understanding of the evolutionary sort of cycle of the wheel, it's again, it's all related to everything, and this is just what has always kept us so fascinated with astrology, that it just responds, it's natural,
and I think it's also a natural cycle, and it's understood. If you look at all the ancient cultures, they talked about this time being the time of the rainbow feathered serpent and the rainbow bridge, and everything to do with this realization of the spectrum. And I was like, well, why don't we just take that to heart and show that there is a direct color, that color makes the difference.
And I think it's a really good inroad to just a quick question. I don't want to keep you too long, but
sure.
Your experience of, let's say, people that aren't into astrology but explaining this kind of thing to them, does that help their sort of that bridge?
It totally softens them. Most people, they just stop at those initial, an airplane would affect gravity and more than the planet, and that's pretty much where their mind stops. It's like, wait a minute, there's a lot more to think about than just gravity. There is the connection of quantum entanglement, first of all, and that requires understanding frequency.
And that's what I was saying about like the early 2000s when I was getting into this. More people were getting into astrology, or not so much getting into it, but kind of understood it better because of all of that. It's like, it makes sense because, we're living in a quantum world, right?
Yeah.
Things make much more sense. So therefore, it's not so strange for people to sort of, maybe they won't be into astrology to study it, but they kind of go, it's not so weird anymore. Yeah.
And taking that one step further, it's not so weird. When I first heard of holographic theory in science, I thought that was weird. Quantum was fun. Holographic was taking it to a whole other level. And now that's being openly discussed, that we live in a holographic reality. And this goes right back to what we understood with the illusory nature, with the Hindus and the Brahmins said, well, this is all a dream, so.
And I loved how you brought the cell sin, and that's something I've been working with for a long time with astrology, or learned a lot about them with the salts missing in my body, right? And my astrology chart. So it actually reminds me, I want to get someone to do a class on that. So, and the holographic idea of also a representation of ourselves sitting in our own astrology chart, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I'd really love to kind of move, like next year, I think it's July, that Uranus meets the North Node. So we have to sort of, I'm planning a bit of a CIA something or other. You might be doing it live, the pyramid. Will you be there yet, or
live from the pyramid? Yeah, why not? Ancient Egypt style. To throw this in, this man came and built a pyramid. He's an Aries with, I believe, a strong Neptune, and he built it on 29 degrees, approximately the same latitude as the pyramid in Cheops.
Oh wow!
Now tell me something's not cosmic at work there.
Well, the more we're tuned into it, the more it's going to happen. And here you go, Agent 84 is moving to a pyramid. I love it.
I think the ancient consciousnesses are studying us, bringing us back online, The ancient magicians in the here and now are their energy is able to activate us more clearly. You can think of it as layers of time and consciousness. So we are able to tap into the magic that what we think of worked at ancient times, they're working now on us. So we're building pyramids and laying out retreats according to the Temple of Man. We're working with all of it.
I love it. I've just put a link, guys, to the Resonance Science Academy. A course that I did years ago is now free online. Do you remember? You might have done it too. They did a course, a couple of years ago, but it's now free online. So really, a lot more information about all this kind of quantum world and science. And like you said in your intro to this whole thing, Russell, it is good for us astrologers to have that backup to be able to talk about this science behind why astrology, would be working and works in our lives.
Well, another aspect is it allows people to step out of their own myopic story. So what you can help clients for years and they can be stuck in the story. It starts to subtly break open their psyche in a new way in relationship to these things. So clients can benefit when you subtly tweak your language to the higher language, that they're relating in their consciousness that it's not all about them. They're a little bit about everything. So.
Yeah. From Josh, have you measured the effect on psyche on the planet retrograde effect of loss of frequencies to human consciousness?
I've taken a look at some of this, but I haven't gotten any clear results I've got a lot on my plate with some of this. Right now I'm working with just kind of the fundamentals of this, but my mind has already started thinking in terms of retrograde and other aspects and how that
I'm just thinking about the experiments, doing more of that. More experiments in the lab at the pyramid, hey?
Yeah, I was wondering if we did that. Well, first of all, the pyramid is like an energy generator, so you're enhancing the battery, your body battery, your soul battery, when you're in that field. But would it have higher effects on the Kalesko work? Because you're actually creating a huge field like they did in the ancient world.
More concentrated.
More concentrated.
Yeah, wow, amazing. Oh God, I can't wait to get there. I'm gonna now because I wasn't thinking of going to America, not that we can go anywhere now, but anyway, let's not think that we can't do those things in the future.
Yeah,
it's really exciting times though, isn't it, with Pluto going into Aquarius and what's ahead. So thanks so much, 84. You're a treasure to be to have, and let's plan something for next or somehow next July, I think it is, for Uranus and the North Node.
Sounds perfect timing.
Thanks, mate. Hello to Shannon too. I love to Shannon, not just hello. Great. Thanks, everyone. Keep quantum.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.